Alright, so we are back with the Hellfire Golem for part 4, so check out the playlist so that you can get caught up. And we switch over to Dr. Stasis, who just made his way through one of the Krakoan portals that has been sabotaged by Orcus. And he introduces himself and also MODOK as Dr. MODOK, and MODOK is like, no, just MODOK is fine. And they let Charles know that they've been working on all of the Krakoan medicine and sabotaging every single one of them. And Orcus makes their way to where the gala is, and they are tearing up everything. Wilson Fisk, and that's a whole nother story, and Emma Frost and a whole bunch of others are doing their best to stave off Orcus. And Orcus has these Stark technological based sentinels, and they are doing the worst. And we switch over to Juggernaut, who is doing his best to fight off Nimrod, but Nimrod is overpowering the Juggernaut, the unstoppable Juggernaut. And Jean comes on the scene and she's telling everyone to stop. She freezes everyone in plain sight. And just when you think the worst has happened, it hasn't yet. Moira McTaggart, who is now Moira X, a robot, she sneaks up behind Jean Grey and she impales her from behind. And you remember in the previous videos where we talked about Cyclops having to leave to go to the treehouse? It was a trap by Orcus, and we see our boy Cyclops laying on the ground, almost being unalived. And we see Moira McTaggart, and she's like, "Look at me, Charles," in the most fanatic and crazy way. Everything in the Hellfire Gala has went to basic hell at this point. And Moira McTaggart has Charles by the throat, and it is... You guys need to go read this book. It is so crazy. And she doesn't unalive him, but Orcus lets him know their demands. And Moira says to Dr. Stasis, deliver the terms. And the terms are pretty simple at this point. Well, at least for Orcus. And he tells Charles, get every single mutant off the planet now. Like now. Basically, make them go through all of the Krakoan gates because it's going to lead them to somewhere that is not Earth. And he's like, hey, he said, if they all leave, we'll never come after you. But if you come back to Earth, it's over for you mutants. And you might wonder, why would they go along with this? Because they hacked all their Krakoan medicine that's gone all over the planet. And basically, people who have taken that medicine can now be controlled and also unalived by Orcus at any point that they feel like it. During this time, on Jean's last bit of breath, she makes a psychic connection with Firestar and basically says, Firestar, I need you to listen up. I'm going to put an idea, right, in Professor or Dr. Stasis's brain right now to make him believe that you've always been a spy for Orcus and you've been working along with him. This way you could get on the inside and help to defeat Orcus. And Firestar's like, Jean, why are you doing this right now? Aren't you being unalive? And she's like, Firestar, you have to do this. I know I'm putting a lot of pressure on you, but do you agree or not? And Firestar's like, let's do this. Now, mind you, this is all happening in the span of a couple of seconds because on the other end, Jean is literally passing away. And Charles is like, damn you all for this. And he talks to all of his mutants and tells them to go through the gates. And some of the mutants are fighting it off because they think that this is a means of Charles being controlled by Orcus or someone else for that matter. And a long time ago, Charles taught the X-Men and a couple other mutants a specific way of fighting off mental attacks. Now, in previous comic books, we've seen Storm use this and other mutants as well. And it's a kind of tactic to just basically push back something that seems to be great on a psychic level. But for everyone else and all the other mutants, they are on their way through the Krakoan portals, or the hacked portals, or the hacked gates, not really portals. And we quickly switch over to Mother Righteous. Now, what she's doing is not relative at this point, but it most likely will be at a later time. And she's taken part of the Krakoan island in the Atlantic and basically turning it into something that's miniature that is in an orb. But for what reason that she's doing that, we're not known until maybe later on. And everyone is going through the portals. It's so crazy because number one, we don't know where they're heading towards. We think they're heading towards Arakko on Mars, but we're not really too sure. And we switch over to Cyclops, who is being held down, but we also see that he is talking to the love of his life, Jean Grey, who's making one last psychic connection, and she basically says, I love you. And he says, I love you, I need you. Unfortunately, Orchis got Cyclops. And she makes the last psychic connection to Wolverine and basically told him that she loved him too. Now, if you're like, what? What's going on? In the Hickman era of the X-Men, there's no longer the between Cyclops and Wolverine over Jean. The three they're all in a couple, basically. Or something of the sorts. But Jean is basically like, yeah, I loved you too. I had feelings for you too. But most importantly, right now, I want you to do what you do best. And we see Wolverine, who's just slicing and dicing everyone around him. And he's using that same mental protection barrier that he was taught. Now we see a whole bunch of mutants that are resistant, but also a ton, and I mean a ton, that are going through the Krakoan gates that are hacked. Now, while he's giving the mental suggestion to everyone to go through the portal, we have Mystique, who is trying to resist. Professor X, Charles, basically tells her to leave Raven, and he pushes her off what seems to be a little cliff, and she lands, and it seems like she's unalive. But you might wonder, like, why did he do that to her? Now, earlier in the Destiny said, hey, if Raven tries to do X, Y, and Z, I need you to do X, Y, and Z. Now, Destiny, we know she's a precog, and she didn't tell him the reasoning for him to do that, but he remembered and he fulfilled it. Now we know that Mystique isn't unalive. She can take it. She has a little bit of durability to take that fall. Rod is Juggernaut. Juggernaut is bloodied up. He has lost his battle. And we see Orchis, but we also see Firestar, who's with them. We know what's going on with that. And they are aligned, and Orchis, the rest of Orchis is like, what is she doing here? And Dr. Stasis is like, she's always been with us, but now she's going to be a full-time Stasis member. She's no longer a spy. But again, we know what really happened with that. And she's working for the X-Men and the rest of Mutant Kind undercover now with the help of Jean Grey, who put the last mental suggestion in Dr. Stasis. Now, a good cohort of the mutant Emma Frost, Kitty Pryde, and a whole bunch of others were able to make their way and teleport out of there. And Miss Marvel is there as well. And at the same gala, before Orchis leaves, there's a whole bunch of humans that are there that are officials and in places of power. And Dr. Stasis takes them all out. So there's no witnesses of what just happened, and that is the one who is doing the nefarious deeds. And Moira McTaggart goes behind Charles Xavier and is about to make the finishing blow, since he already did exactly what he was supposed to. And out of nowhere, Rogue grabs Moira McTaggart, aka Moira X, and basically pulls her body apart and grabs Professor X and flies the hell out of there. And you remember in the previous video when we talked about Rogue having to leave because she got an alert because something was happening to Captain America? That was all a plot by Orchis. All to get the Avengers away, to get Cyclops away. It was all their plan. And he says, bring me back. Bring me back. And Rogue is like, what's going on with you? And then Professor X says, I can't sense them. Like, none of them. None of the mutants that went through the gate. And he feels like he sent them through a meat grinder, basically to their death, because he doesn't know what's going on. And he is in a mental state of chaos. And he tells Rogue, go avenge Krakoa. And we switch back over to some of the survivors that we spoke about a little bit earlier. And Kitty Pryde is leading on one of the gates. And traditionally, she could never go through the gates. And this was always an anomaly. But for some reason, she falls back. And the Hellfire Gala book ends right there. But the story continues with the fall of X. So type in X-Men to know what happens with Kitty, but also what is going on.